This is a presentation about the power of Django for sustainable websites and web apps. I'm Miriam Heller, and I'm going to take you on this trip, and we're going to learn about writing the web. So you want to build a website or a web app. That's a great idea. The web is how modern commerce and social interaction happens. But how? Well, you might take a strategy of, I'm going to just launch right into it. You writing code to handle the web communication formats like HTML and HTTP. You enjoy writing low-level socket communication and dealing with multiple layers of industry, international, and vendor standards, right? No, probably not. And if you did jump right into it, you'd quickly find that it's a lot harder than it looks. There are so many nitsy but critical details to get right. Every layer, from primitive communication to long-term data management, getting them right takes a lot of attention and effort. Even if you're good at it, you'd find yourself working on a number of mechanical tasks common to all websites and not really adding value of your own. So what is the alternative? Well, you could use web frameworks. They provide pre-structured, well-proven solutions to the 50-some-odd miscellaneous tasks of getting a website or app up and running. If you follow the framework, that's work you don't have to do yourself. Frameworks have been put in place by experts who've written the web many times over. Experts who know what's required to get you going, who anticipate the inevitable bumps and hurdles you'll face along the way as you scale up and develop your site. Frameworks provide the structure and tools, the kits, if you will, to get you going quickly and allow you to focus on your site, your ideas, and your vision, rather than reinventing the web wheel. This is where Django, powered by Python, comes in. Django is one of the most popular web frameworks. It is written in Python, which is one of the most popular and easily readable programming languages. Django emerged in about 2005 as the web was maturing from new technologies to a requirement for just about every business, large and small alike. So who uses this Django stack? Well, it's used by some of the web's most visited sites like Google, Instagram, Mozilla, NASA, National Geographic, Pinterest, Spotify, and the Washington Post, among others. Without endorsing to get on the bandwagon propaganda, it's useful to say that it's a pretty good bandwagon. It's also touted by the Django web market itself as being the web framework for perfectionists with deadlines. Initially designed to operate newspaper websites, Django sought to eliminate unnecessary tasks by implementing them once, well, and completely, thus providing a solid foundation for managing common website work. This do-it-right thinking extends not just to a basic web server and content pages, but larger needs, such as content that evolves over time, a management console, user authentication and management, a back-end database system, the ability to be extended with external plugins and modules, security protections, REST APIs, performance optimizations like caching, internationalization, search engine optimization, and literally dozens of other concerns that first-time web developers probably haven't even imagined they need. But those that have been down this road a dozen or a few dozen times before know they are right around the corner. Django starts with all built-in options to address all these things as part of the framework. The common catchphrase that comes to mind is batteries included. Most of the tools and facilities you'll need are already included from the get-go. So there are actually two framework options when one thinks about a framework generally. You can have a configurable or an opinionated framework. Frameworks are pretty much always extensible with plugins and add-ons by design. That's literally part of the definition of a framework if you look at Wikipedia. But those frameworks that present themselves as configurable often take a much more relaxed, mix and match components as you like, it's all good with us kind of attitude. Apache and Nginx, for example, are highly configurable web serving frameworks. They don't much care what language you write your code in. Java or PHP, JavaScript or Python, Ruby or Perl, or a dozen others, whatever you like. Same for the databases you use, the template engines, the operating system you run on, the dozens of other key choices. Let 1,000 flowers bloom. Opinionated frameworks, on the other hand, and their designers take a very different approach. They are extensible, but more on the periphery than at the core. Their attitude is, we know this space and what it takes to be successful. Let us choose, integrate, and test the best of the components and deliver them together as one unified product. You can trust us to do that well, so don't try to change the approach unless you really, completely, utterly know what you're doing, and probably not even then. Django is unequivocally an opinionated framework. It's written in Python, for example, not whatever language you might choose. If you use Django, you will develop your site in Python. You will use an MVC or a similar type model view controller architectural plan, and you will use it now and always. You will abide by Django's very specific notions of how and where you should store your data. That is, you will store your data in a database. That database will have a carefully controlled data schema, and there will be rigorous plans on how to evolve data structures over time. You won't access your data with just any kind of query. You will use Django's structured query mechanism. In the view of the Django team, its tools are time-proven to be right and the best choice for the majority of web developers, and they expect you to not only follow but comply with those choices. The pattern of we will choose the best way because we know how to ease your path continues throughout. And frankly, if you're not on board with that, you should probably choose a different framework. Django developers are like experienced surgeons. You come to them for a solution to a problem that they know how to address with expert precision, and you probably do not, or at least you know it less well. You get a high confidence, high performance, well-proven path managed by experts. The bargain is that you trade away your ability to make 1,000 small design decisions along the way. It's probably worth nothing that this is identical to the trade-off that happens when we engage in cloud services, but let's review that. We could operate our own physical servers, network routers, storage arrays, and related gear, but we often choose not to because we don't want the bother or expense. We're confident we're getting a high-quality result, but we're never going to be able to tell Amazon, Google, or Microsoft, or any other utility provider what kind of CPU chips to use, or how to wire servers together, where to source their electric power, or what kind of storage to buy. They get to make those decisions on our behalf. The MVC architecture that is more or less what Django follows. In fact, it is slightly different and it has evolved into the MVT architecture, but since most models today use the MVC, we're going to sort of figure it out using that model. It starts with a data model, structuring all the data and content your site stores. The model also drives your database, the physical components that actually handle your data. When you get going in development, Django uses SQLite 3, a simple relational database. For production, you might want to upgrade it to MySQL, MariaDB, or PostgreSQL, or a similar full-scale database management system. But the code will work exactly the same thanks to Django's built-in modeling and data model evolution. Data and data changes populate the views, which define how information is presented. In a web context, this is usually through HTML pages, which are rendered via templates. But application components can also provide custom views or program-oriented views like a REST API. Front-end coding for your site, say in JavaScript or in a language like Swift or for iOS devices, or app may also provide views. User interactions trigger the controller, broadly speaking, your application logic or your business logic, the glue logic that binds the different parts of your site or app together. MVC is a long proven, since the 1970s, and highly scalable design used throughout the industry. It's famous, however, for having a pronounced learning curve. That means it takes a while to understand. Remember, Django dictates that there's a right and sustainable way to build for the web. If there's an investment required to learn it, you should make that investment. A little bit of an aside that I just wanted to mention is, in fact, Django is built on the model view template paradigm, and it differs slightly from the MVC. The main difference between the two paradigms is that Django itself takes care of the controller part, the software code that controls, as we said, the interactions between the model and the view. That leaves us with the template, and the template, as was stated before, is the HTML file, but now it's mixed with Django template language. So there are several patterns or designs that are very common to Django-powered sites. For example, CRUD, which stands for Create, Read, Update, and Delete. These are the four primary forms of the HTTP request that we see in an application programming interface. Sounds pedestrian, CRUD, but it is the core data processing of innumerable applications. Buy, sell, tracking, bookkeeping, inventory, reconciliation, financials, CRM, ERP. It's basically trillions of dollars of commerce and economic activity moving through such sites every year. CRUD is the foundation, but business logic makes these into full apps. If you add some charts, graphs, analytics, it seems a lot less mundane. Django has, through CRUD support, built in. So in addition to CRUD, another paradigm, which is more not what the paradigm is internal to Django, but the kinds of applications that one will end up using because they are facilitated through CRUD and Django, are content management systems. These are the core of visible websites. They're the blogs, the marketing news, the documentation, the social media. What websites are best known for? They often are the showroom or the client engagement center of substantial apps and business opportunities. These are easily built with Django components or use Django-based CMS extensions, such as Wagtail. Then there's the back end, and that provides the home base and infrastructure for a web, mobile, or desktop app, or for a network-provided service such as software as a service. Typically, this combines CRUD and CMS, and maybe RESTful APIs as well. Django is just one component in an overall much larger solution, and it's always going to typically be coupled with a front end, as in client server. This is often done with JavaScript or, again, for a mobile app using Swift. And it supports many different types of functions: periodic tasks, accepting payments, managing client workflow. So now that we've looked at the structure of Django apps as an overview, in the next section we're going to kick you off onto some hands-on training. So hands-on training and step-by-step going through exercises are really the only practical way to learn a systematic skill. There's realistically no short video that's going to convey all of the different programming and organizational skills necessary to construct a modern web app. Django's a framework, it's not magic. This is especially true with batteries included kinds of frameworks like Django that cover many different disciplines and concerns. They tend to have a significant learning curve, and Django is no exception. Django expects you to do things the right way. Learning that right way is a necessary investment. Even the most ambitious and eager instructional course, like the Ultimate Django course, for example, estimate that intermediate level skills require 6 to 8 weeks of work and learning. Even that, however, would be amazing progress. You couldn't hope to learn an intermediate level chef or automobile mechanic or welder in that time. Those vocations take several years of full-time training and apprenticeship, and no one would consider complex technical skills, say intermediate level jet engine designer, achievable in less than 4 to 6 years of full-time training. That you can become a productive web developer in a few months in itself is remarkably good. What I can give you here in this tutorial is a flavor for the structure of the app, which I hope I began to do, and how the pieces fit together, which I will be doing in this part of the course. We're going to actually look at some of the code structure. That's something that you really can't start without. You can't really appreciate how to use building blocks without understanding what the structure you're building is. So what we're going to do is you might want to first sit down and have some step-by-step tutorials, such as the Django Girls tutorial, and I will give you the URL in the references section at the end of this talk, the Django Project's own Writing Your First Django App tutorial, or the Ultimate Django tutorial that we were referred to in this course. So what are the steps? Here I'm sorry, the Django Girl, the 3 or 4 tutorials, but nothing will be better than you going through your own code and experimenting. So the first steps really are to start with a recent version of Python, such as Python 3.7, or if you want to stick with a 3.6, nothing older than that. These are the modern Python platforms, and you might as well start up to date, especially since anything older is either already very soon going to be at its end of life. You can download your fresh new Python from python.org, and at the end, in the references, we'll offer up that URL for Mac, Windows, or Linux. There are other sources of quality Python packages, including Active State, Anaconda Homebrew for Mac OS, and the standard Linux install repositories for the more specialized needs. Next, you would download and install a recent version of Django. On most systems, this can be accomplished through your Python interpreter. If your Python interpreter is accessed via, say, Python 3, for example, then use Python 3-m pip install using the flag -u Django. If your Python is simply called Python, then the Python -m pip install -u Django will do the trick. Whichever name for installation of Python you use in this step, use it for all future steps. On Linux and Mac OS systems, you may need to preface these commands with sudo and give your password when requested for authorization. The -u, by the way, stands for upgrade. It upgrades any Django install you might have on the system. At the end of this step, ideally, you'll have a Django 2.2 or later installed. Next, you got to choose a solid IDE. It could be VS Code, Atom, PyCharm, whichever you choose is largely a matter of your preference, and this is not something on which Django has an opinion. The reason you need a good IDE is that web programming inherently means dealing with multiple concerns in tight coordination. Here, you've got HTML, JavaScript there, CSS over there, a database file, application code, etc. Getting an IDE you like will make the jumping back and forth more comfortable. Good support for syntax highlighting, error detection, and good auto-suggestion of the thing you need to type next will reduce your cognitive load as you develop. Finally, you need a project. So there's nothing like practical steps to get you in motion. In a terminal window, navigate to, that is, use your cd command if you're in your bash terminal to a convenient development location and start your first Django app. Projects are ways to combine all the components needed for a site, similar to the way many IDEs do for other development projects. Type Django-admin at the bottom of this slide, start project 1. The first word, this is bash script essentially, so the first word is always a noun, similar to Git, Docker, and other popular systems that use multi-level command line interfaces, CLI. The second word is the verb stating what you want to do. In this case, you want to start a project. The third word is the name of the project. Name it pretty much whatever you like, though avoid words like Django and test, which conflict with other Django uses. Your project folder will now contain a structure like this. On our left, we see the whole point of this project, start project, is that it generates a template of the files that are needed for each component. So the directory 11 follows a Python convention, that is naming the implementation subfolder the same as the overall project name. Manage.py is a program that you'll use to start, stop, and otherwise manage your site. Now type Python manage.py run server. You don't have much of a website yet, but it's already ready to run. By default, it runs a default site on your HTTP localhost 8000. Using your browser, try it out. You may well get an error message regarding an unapplied migrations. As you see, you may get that. If so, it's very simple to take care of. It's normal. Do Control-C and then run Python 3 manage.py migrate, and then Python 3 manage.py run server again. And the migrations are model updates. They're a normal part of workflow, and you will end up, in fact, with a migrations folder, as you can see in the next slide. We've added a migrations folder in here. So if you're wanting to begin an app, a new component, it's time to add an app to your site. Apps are the subcomponents of projects. Most modern web frameworks use this style of subdivision. Sometimes the parts are called apps, sometimes they're called components, sometimes something else, but they're always a way to subdivide complex content and activities into similar parts. Apps can also potentially be reused as parts of multiple sites. This is already Django's opinionated design in action. Its developers know that you'll need reusable components soon enough, so they give them to you at the outset. These are what I'm talking about, the populated templates of files. Try stopping your server, running Python 3 manage.py start apps polls. So that would, if you're looking at the structure of this folder, we've added polls, and it has also populated the polls folder with the template of the different files that you need. You could use blogs just the same. These are all built-in add-ins. So while we're talking about these components or apps, many of them are already defined within Django. So they're similar in some sense. If you think about components in Angular, the project explicitly delegates to apps. So we'll see later on, there's a urls.py file, and that specifies the routes. So using these, so you can also see that the application components are coming together. You have an admin.py, you had the controller, and I'm sorry, I'm going to just go back for a second. I can't. So let's look at what you would, in the previous folder, what we did have is we had the apps.py, but we also had the models. So here we can take a look at what is in models.py. Well, it holds the structure and the types of your core data and content. That's also the M in MVC, and in Django, it's the M in NVT. While migrations holds the database migrations, basically different steps along the evolution of your model. Another file is you might have organized routes, and what this means is sometimes we have different ways of responding depending upon what department we're in an organization. So these would contain the different types of responses you might have to different HTTP requests, how those responses might vary according to, in this case, departments. A very important one here, though, is the first one, which is the redirect view. That often it's a permanent path, a permanent route, and that typically occurs when you've decided to update a response like pages promotion. Rather than actually go there, you want to redirect the view. Anyway, this is really a high-level overview with some technical instantiations to understand what you will be looking at. But by looking at the structure of this from a higher level and seeing what some of the low level looks like, you're much better equipped to go through a tutorial and understand what road you're on in your tutorial, where are you headed, because there are many, many pieces to this puzzle. You may not think you need all this structure, or that things like testing and data migration will be useful right away. That doesn't really matter. The Django team knows from experience that you need these sooner than later, and they've provided them for you. As long as you're using Django, just follow the Django way. By the way, other popular frameworks like Ruby on Rails, for example, or Angular also impose many of the same architectural expectations and subdivisions. If you know any of those, it may make learning Django easier. Web apps have many moving parts. Adding structures gives you a bit higher learning curve now, but it keeps complex parts straight and manageable. And whatever framework you go with, they lay down patterns that you need to follow. By the way, you're certain to make some errors during these early stages. Either you Python 3 manage.py run server, or you access a specific page templates will give you voluminous error reports with what will seem like way too much information. Take heart. While the process of configuring pages does take some time, some twiddling and trial and error, it does get easier. And all that debugging information, while maybe seemingly excessive now, often provides clues to what went wrong that will prove useful as you work toward your app. There's no meaningful way to lead you through the app creation in this short video. We started to give you a flavor for what the development components look like and how they relate to one another and how they'll be used, but there's just way too much detailed plumbing to step through every bit. Even if we did, you'll get a lot more value following a written step-by-step tutorial where you have time to explore each step. There are several excellent sources, as we stated before. There are step-by-step instructions, and we mentioned Django Girls, Django Project's own tutorial, and the Ultimate Django. But before we leave, let's just also recognize that there's a difference between running a web app server in your local development environment and shifting to a production environment. The easy Python 3 manage.py run server, that's so easy for development iterations. Well, it's not going to scale to a high number of user requests. It is already pretty secure, but you'll almost certainly want to access it via an HTTPS, not just HTTP. You can set those features up for yourself. For example, in a server image or Docker container that you would then run on Amazon Web Services, Microsoft's Azure, or Google Cloud Platform, to name just a few major hosting options. But that requires a fair degree of tinkering, including with mechanical details like configuring website certificates. It's easy to get bogged down in such DevOps. A much easier way to get going quickly in production that will scale well over time is Heroku. Heroku is a platform as a service provider. And is a service provider, and it offers simple instructions that are specific to getting a Django site up and running in the cloud, as well as some sample projects that can be modified with your own code and deployed right out of GitHub. You can update your live site, your production app with terminal commands, or configure continuous integration, continuous delivery service such as Circle CI or Jenkins CI, Travis CI, to update and auto-update your site. A simple first step is getting the site running on a default Heroku account, which will look something like an HTTP stout.kitten.herokuuapp.com. The beginning part is always the name of your app, and then it's the .heroku app.com. Your Django app will be running on full Heroku infrastructure, such as Goonicorn web server, a substantial upgrade over the built-in development server. However, you will still want to acquire a custom domain name, engage security keys, configure your logging, and otherwise get your app seaworthy. The issues of running web apps in production at scale and with solid security are many. DevOps and site administration are specialty fields unto themselves. And when a site or app goes into production, they usually need business and marketing operational support. That's well beyond Django's field of expertise. Django's contribution is getting your site or app up and running and into operation. Where it goes from there is up to you. So just to review what we've covered here, we've covered the framework that can handle a million small details of building and serving a website or app so you don't have to. We've covered the fact that Django is a special kind of framework. It's an opinionated framework. It's based on Python and best practices. It has been tried and tested and loved by many. It does require a long learning curve, and that's the trade-off between having an opinionated framework that is probably going to, in the long run, pay off. You're going to be doing things right. It's not going to fail. It is an MVC, MVT architecture, and that's how it's presented, where the logic is gluing together the different parts. It comes in our jargon with batteries included because this is a strategy of providing the most of what you'll need that's already been defined out of the box. This increases your initial complexity and learning curve, but it makes the project overall more scalable. And then it's up to you. You got to get going, and the web app is how global commerce and social interaction happens. During this century anyway, there's no IT skill more pervasively needed. So expect to invest weeks to months to skill up on Django. Thank you so much for your attention. Views.py, and that contains your data views, defining how your pages look. And it can, in this case, we might see something like test.py would be holding tests because correctness is important. The views are the V in MVC. Finally,